Volkswagen Golf is undoubtedly one of the best-selling cars in the entire world, with over 35 million units sold over 7 generations. Now comes the latest 8th generation Golf, which will be launched in Malaysia very soon. So let's see what the Golf Mk8 has to offer Malaysian customers. First up, there are two variants available for the Golf, from the base Golf 1.4 TSI R-Line down to the sportier version, the Golf GTI, right here. Now on to the crucial part. Both variants are locally assembled right here in Malaysia. Now this is especially important for the Golf GTI because this car has never been assembled outside of Germany and China. This to me is a very clear signal from Volkswagen Malaysia that they are taking the Malaysian market very seriously and they are here to stay. Right now, pretty much the entire model range is assembled here in Malaysia. The Golf, the Passat, the Arteon, the Tiguan, the Allspace, all are made here in Malaysia. For a relatively low volume car manufacturer to make everything here in Malaysia, that is pretty significant. Now these cars are not yet on sale, so we don't have the final prices for now. The only thing we have to go by are the previous prices the Golfs were sold at. The Golf R-Line was sold at 170,000 ringgit, while the Golf GTI was around 240,000. Being CKD now, they should go lower by 10-15,000, maybe more, maybe less, we don't quite know. But in general, it should be more competitive against its rivals. For the Golf R-Line, that would be the Mazda 3 hatchback. For the GTI, would be the Mercedes-Benz A250. Now let's move on to looks, where it's a little bit controversial. The Golf still looks almost recognizably as a Golf, which is a good thing because it is still the benchmark, the standard bearer for C-segment hatchbacks. In fact, in most markets, that segment is just called the Golf class. Now on to the controversial bits. The bonnet now extends much further, a bit of a clamshell design. The headlamps are a lot slimmer than before, and at the bottom there is this big open gaping mouth. Me personally, I think the previous version, the Mark 7.5 facelift, looked a lot more handsome than this, but you can say this looks a lot more modern, a lot more organic than before. Now on to the details. Where the GTI previously had its own set of unique front bumper, it now shares the exact same front bumper as the R-Line, which is a bit of a shame. The differences are all in the inserts and the details. The large lower mouth of the GTI has this very large honeycomb design finished in plain black matte plastic, whereas on the R-Line has a much simpler cut straight vents finished in gloss black instead. Of course, not to forget the big GTI badge on the front, whereas R-Line has a nice new R logo. Now on to the disappointments. Starting with the headlights, this car does not have the red strip that extends throughout the entire headlamp cluster. Here is just finished in plain chrome instead. That red line is exclusive to the higher end full IQ light system, which we do not get. Now these may have the IQ light badging at the side, but it doesn't have the full matrix LED functionalities because, well, for one, it doesn't have the cameras at the top to make it work. More on that later. But what's even more significant is the lack of the front fog lamps on the GTI. If fitted, this would have a very distinctive set of checkered flag or X pattern on it. Here, it just looks a lot more plain. So overall, this car does not have the full GTI look in my books, which is a bit of a shame. Onto the side, the GTI gets its standard 18-inch alloy wheels, which do look very good, and it's wrapped in ultra high performance Bridgestone Potenza S005 tires. Now these tires are made specifically for the GTI, and if you look closely, there's even a GTI logo on it. That is very cool. Behind the wheel is a larger set of performance brakes, of course finished in the trademark red brake calipers. Onto the R-Line, it gets a set of 17-inch wheels which look a touch too small, and it's wrapped in Bridgestone Turanza T005 touring tires. The brakes are of course smaller, and the calipers are finished in plain silver instead. At the back is where I think this car looks the most like a Golf, especially with the signature thick C-pillars back there. And just like the front, the taillights have this much slimmer design, and with full LEDs, I think they look really great when lit. The lower bumper again is the same between the R-Line and the GTI. The differences are only in the diffuser and the inserts. The GTI here gets this large set of twin tailpipes, which I think look fantastic, while the R-Line gets a much more closed-in design with fake for tailpipes instead. The actual pipes are neatly tucked behind the bumper, as is usual for Volkswagen now. Moving up, the badging is different of course. It's GTI here and it's just Golf on the R-Line. At the top, the spoiler is also different between the two variants, but unless you put them side by side, they may look pretty much identical to each other. The GTI has a very small, very subtle gurney flap, if you will, at the back, whereas the R-Line has a much neater looking, simpler rear spoiler. But it's on the inside where the Golf has seen its biggest leap yet, whereas on the outside it's still recognizable as a Golf. Inside here, it's a whole different thing now. The top half with the dual screens, it may look like a combination of between Mercedes-Benz and BMW design, but beyond that, this has taken it onto a whole new level in terms of simplicity. First up, you won't find any knobs or dials on this car anywhere because pretty much everything is now moved to touch controls. For instance, to change the temperature, you now slide your finger across this touchpad over here, and it's the same story with volume controls as well. There are no volume knobs. You just slide across this big piece of touch sensitive panel over there. I think you will get used to it eventually, but to start with, it's not the easiest to use. Down here, there are a few shortcut buttons like your driving modes, which is important for the GTI moving from Eco, Comfort, Sport or Individual, plus another button for Climate. This is where you get a more granular controls for your aircon system. But the thing is this, when you're driving along, you're on the main menu, you want to do a simple thing as changing the fan settings. You can't just do that on the main screen. You have to press Climate button first and then only change the fan settings. That is an extra step, which when you're driving fast is not the easiest to use. This approach is extended throughout the rest of the cabin as well. The steering wheel, brand new design with the new logo as well. Everything on it is a capacitive touch button. Even the light controls on the side are touch controls, where before you just have a big grand knob that you just twist to set to your particular settings. Here you have a single button to cycle through whether you want your lights to be on, off or auto. Again, yeah, not the best. One interesting thing is this, despite this car not having front fog lights, they have this button called poor weather light control. So this is a small light that shines down so you can see more whether it's raining or fogged. So yeah, it's not quite fog lights, but there's still a workaround at least. Now let's move on to the center console over here. Again, this is a much more simplified version compared to all other cars. There is a big engine start-stop button. It's now rectangle instead of the usual round button. And down here is the gear knob, or I should say the gear selector now. You just push this small knob back for D, forward for R, or press this big button for park. I think this is very easy to use. I think you'll get used to this very, very quickly. I'm a big fan of this. Not quite so the touch buttons, but this I like. Now onto the screens, they are still the class of the field. The instrument cluster over here is still the very best in the business. It is extremely clear, very easy to read, and it is the most customizable screen across all of its competitors. And then there's the center screen. As you can see, this is very much inspired by the Apple CarPlay layout. It's all very clear to see tiles and big buttons, and of course this also has wireless Apple CarPlay, as you can see over there. This is also one of the highest res screens I've seen, one of the best implementation of CarPlay just yet. This being wireless just makes it all perfect. However, for Android users, you still have to plug up a cable for this. Unfortunate, but yeah, that's just the way it is. Now onto build quality, and this is where you would expect the Golf to excel, and it does. The entire top half is covered in this nice and plushy soft material, and it's not your regular soft touch material. It is really nice to touch, really nice to hold, really nice to press, and this extends to the top of the door cards as well. As you move down the cabin, all the bits get harder, which is to be expected in this price range, but it does not get too scratchy or too sharp at any point. I think this is on par or maybe even better than the current generation Mercedes-Benz A-Class. Next, practicality. Here you get a set of USB-C chargers for your phones. That is if you don't use wireless CarPlay, of course. And down here is something that is unique to the Golf GTI. This is where you store your phone and then you lock it down with this flap in case you want to go up gunting or maybe drive around a track or something, so your phone doesn't fly about anywhere. But there is one issue with this. The top flap, there is a Golf script on it, but it's finished in this rather cheap looking shiny plastic. Yeah, doesn't quite sit well with the rest of the cabin. Next, something that is crucial for a Golf GTI: extremely supportive seats. Now these are single piece backrests and I think they are fabulous. They look good, they feel really nice, very comfortable, very supportive. Although the color options over here, you know, black and light grey and a bit of red in the back, perhaps may not suit everybody's tastes. But to sit on, they are fantastic. Lastly, the small details on this cabin. The cup holders are nice and wide, but there's also a set of arms to hold smaller cans or bottles. That is very, very clever. The keys also look very good, very modern, very classy. I think this looks a hell lot better than the current Volkswagen keys. Now, one thing that is not so great are the top-mounted LED lights. Now, these work perfectly well. They look decent enough. They are very bright, being LED units, and they work using touch-sensitive buttons as well. I don't have any complaints about that. But just the look of it looks extremely old school. This could have fit in a Golf Mk8 and it would have looked right at home on that one. On a Golf 8, it looks a little bit out of place. In terms of trim and specifications, the R-Line is nearly identical to the more expensive GTI. The differences are all in the small details. The center trim has a honeycomb design on the GTI, whereas on the R-Line it has a fake carbon fiber print instead. The seats surprisingly are exactly the same. The difference is the GTI is fully covered in leather, whereas the R-Line has a combination of leather, fabric and suede. The instrument cluster, the GTI does have its own unique theme, but beyond that, all the screens are identical between the GTI and the R-Line. You can pretty much choose any color you want through the theme color selector. I think the only thing you will miss between the GTI and the R-Line is the powered front seats on the GTI, whereas on the R-Line it's a full manual affair. On a car that is to be 170,000 ringgit, that is a bit of a sticking point, I think. One last bit of complaint is the audio system. Here, both cars get the bog standard speakers instead of the higher end Harman Kardons available in other markets. Now in the back here, the Golf is great if not excellent. Space in the back is not too bad. I think this has about the same space as the previous Golf and is about on par with the latest Mercedes-Benz A-Class. I think people of up to say 180 centimeters tall shouldn't fit in the back here just fine, but if you're taller than that, you might have issues, especially with legroom and perhaps headroom as well. Onto the seats themselves, they are excellent. As you can see, they have a bit of a scalloped form to it and they really hug you in place. I think these are fantastic for long journeys, unless you are extremely tall, that is. As for features in the back here, at the top you get again touch control lights, nice to have, nice to see. In the middle here you get your own set of aircon vents, although you can only control the temperature, if not the fan speed in the back here. Beyond that, you've got multiple pockets for your, I don't know, handphones or gadgets or tablets or whatever. And on the side, the door cards now unfortunately are hard, not as soft as the ones at the front. Lastly, visibility. The side windows are massive, gives a great view out, but the single piece front seats are massive. They really block your view out at the front. I think sitting in the back, yeah, you might be disturbed by the lack of front view in this car. As for practicality, the Golf has a 274-litre boot space, which is not massive, but should be enough for a regular weekend getaway. Of course, you can get more space by folding the rear seats down almost flat, and the boot floor has 2 levels to it to fit slightly taller items. Underneath that is a space saver spare tyre, which between these two cars carry different brands. The GTI has a Hankook spare tyre, while the R-Line has a Linglong tyre. Nothing against that brand specifically, but for a premium German brand, that is not good optics. Now let's talk about the engines, starting with the base R-Line. This has a carryover 1.4 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine. It's the exact same engine as before, same numbers as well, 150 PS and 250 Newton meters of torque. The biggest change is the transmission. The old dry clutch 7-speed DSG has been completely thrown out, replaced by an Aisin traditional 8-speed automatic transmission. So those of you who are always afraid of the 3 letters D, S and G here in Malaysia, you now have this, a Japanese transmission. Performance has taken a slight hit, needing 8.5 seconds to get from 0 to 100. The old car with the same engine but a DSG needed just 8.2 seconds. But if power is your concern, you should really be looking at this, the Golf GTI. Again, this has the exact same engine as before, a 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine, but this time the numbers have been massaged a little bit. This now makes 245 PS and 370 Newton meters of torque. Compared to the old car, this makes 15 PS and 20 Newton meters compared to before. What's also new is the transmission. This now has a 7-speed wet DSG gearbox, replacing the previous 6-speed DSG. But in terms of performance, this car is about the same as before. It goes from 0 to 100 in just 6.3 seconds. Now, to manage all that extra performance, this has a much sportier chassis underneath. First of all, this sits low to the ground by 15mm, and this is equipped with DCC, Dynamic Chassis Control. This is a set of dynamic dampers, and you have no less than 15 different settings to choose from, ranging from comfort to sport. Beyond that, this car also has electronic differential or XDS Plus, and with that, Volkswagen says it can move almost 100% of the power between the 2 front wheels. With this, it's claimed that this car can fully eliminate any form of understeer. The steering also carries a unique setup for the GTI, and as I mentioned before, the brakes are bigger, more powerful on this car as well. Also, if you're wondering, the Golf R-Line now gets rear multi-link suspension, which should give it a clear advantage over the Mercedes-Benz A200's torsion beam setup. Now, lastly, I hate to end on a downer, but in this case, it has to be done, because in terms of safety, these 2 cars are absolute disappointments. It has just the usual range of 6 airbags and electronic stability control, but beyond that, there's absolutely nothing. There's no AEB or autonomous emergency braking, there's no lane keeping assist, there's no blind spot monitor, let alone more advanced features like adaptive cruise control, low speed follow, and so on. For a brand new model launch for 2022, this is borderline unacceptable. Volkswagen Malaysia, if you're watching, please do something about this, and quickly. Thank you. If we can put that aside, I think these 2 cars are fantastic entries into the Malaysian market. I myself can't wait to drive the brand new GTI. Stay tuned to Polton.org to get the prices as soon as these cars are launched. But for now, what do you think of the new Golfs here in Malaysia? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and stay safe, everyone.